CBRE multifamily sales team for about 5 years. I've been living in an owner-occupied duplex for 5, and I've also invested in a 15-unit before. I'm actually leaving my job at the end of the month to start my own consulting gig, helping groups from around the country that are looking in Minneapolis or other markets underwrite deals, the financial modeling, things like that.
Good for you.
Thanks,
Awesome.
appreciate that.
It's good velocity.
Yeah, and I mean the syndication, I'm going to be working with individuals that are buying and selling real estate deals, so it's just important to get knowledgeable and understand in case I find something or can put something together and make something happen fast.
I'm Chief Singh. I own 2 properties, 1 duplex and a single family home, both renters. And my day job is I'm a software consultant, and I'm here to learn about syndication.
I'm Nick Boswell. I am a principal in the Phoenix Group with my friend Darren here. And for 17 years I've been in finance and sales and financial products, and have worked into real estate, and I'm now focusing on commercial real estate, and been here to learn all I can about syndication.
My name is Hunter Brennan. I intern at Silicon Prairie. I'm my senior in school at St. Cloud State studying economics, and I'm here to learn.
Nice job. College student.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
You're a bit biased though, aren't you?
No, that's awesome.
Oh, I thought you went to St.
No.
I imagined you were making a very good joke. My mistake.
My name is Marissa Simonetti. I've done a couple flips over the years, and I'm looking to put together a power team of individuals who want to invest, syndicate real estate for the tax advantages, and also to grow wealth.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Lindo. I'm a chef by night, so we own a duplex in St. Paul, and I'm here to learn more about syndication.
I'm Jade Rowe. I'm a licensed agent in Minnesota, currently working as an advisor at Renters Warehouse. Here to learn about syndication, know good framework around it. Would love to put one together eventually, or invest in someone else's task with it. So,
You work with Steve? There?
yep.
Josh Mockelstead. I work in financial planning, and I've just been interested in learning more about real estate and syndication, both for myself and clients who are involved in that sort of thing.
Matt Onofrio. I am a nurse anesthetist by day. I bought a 14-unit apartment building with a partner during my doctorate, and we flipped that, and then I'm closing on a strip mall, and I hope to make it finish.
Good for you.
Lindsay Nelson. I'm a pharmaceutical rep, and I am here for emotional support.
You're looking for emotions?
I'm here for money. That's what I heard.
That's what I heard.
You're doing great. Welcome.
We're here for you.
Thanks for coming, everybody. My name is Jordan Morehead. I'm a real estate agent here at Keller Williams, and why we're in this room right here, so I'm glad they have a nice training room that they let us use all the time. But first and foremost, I'm a multifamily investor. I started with a duplex, and now I own 20 units in Kentucky and Texas. So, my reason for being here is wanting to learn more about multifamily, because I've been able to tell rather quickly that those 20 units aren't going to get me to where I want to go. I'm going to need more than that to stop doing what I do on a daily basis, or really just develop my business. I really don't want to stop working, and I think I talk to a lot of people that want to stop working. I don't want to stop working. I enjoy working. I've always done what I like to do. I started the business when I was 21, liked it, sold it a few years ago, and I'll continue to do this until I want to develop into something else and just continue to buy multifamily as I go. So really just the reason for being here is wanting to grow and scale my business on the multifamily side. Todd?
Awesome. You want me to get going?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So first of all, everybody that's here, awesome, because this is how you guys are going to grow your business. Not listen to me. You're going to grow your business through being here and then networking, getting to know other people, and building those relationships. That's how you're going to grow your business. So congrats for being here. Hopefully I can teach you something, but if I don't, at least you should meet some people here and get to know them and build some relationships. So, now I've got a fancy little slideshow and all that kind of stuff. If I don't reach any of the slideshow, I don't care. I want you guys to ask questions. So anything you want to ask me about syndication, just ask away. If I can't answer it, we've got some other people that have done syndication in here. I'm sure we can get your questions answered. I'm not an attorney, so I'm not going to give you necessarily legal advice, but I'm going to hopefully teach you some things that might help keep you out of trouble too. And then, of course, verifying with your attorney. So a little bit about me. For those of you who don't know me, again, I'm Todd Dexheimer. And I don't know how to make slideshows, so it's not very good. I'm the owner of Venture D Properties. I have a podcast. It's called Pillars of Wealth Creation. And if you have not listened to it, I'd love you to listen to it. Pillars of Wealth Creation. It's on iTunes and all that kind of stuff. And then give me a rating review. Hopefully 5 stars. If you don't want to give me 5 stars, just don't rate it. And then I do some private coaching and consulting. So if you're interested in that, that's fine too. And then I'm a husband and father of 2 amazing kids. Love sports, love the outdoors. That's what I do. So yeah, bad at slideshows. Real quick, I used to be a teacher, now I'm an investor. And you guys said you wanted to be skipping this path of single families and building that portfolio. Well, that's how I started. And it is a way to get started. Now, there's a lot of head damage to that way. Maybe the best way is if you can go bigger quicker, but that's kind of how I started. I did over 150 flips. I amassed a 1 to 4 family portfolio of 75-ish units. Since sold quite a few, but I still own, I don't even know, probably 40-ish, 50 maybe, I don't know. But I'm slowly kind of selling those and then building the multifamily. So right now that's what I focus on is multifamily syndication, which is why I'm here. I've done all kinds of crazy stuff. I've done some wholesales. I flipped a ski resort. I flipped a mobile home park. I've done some developments. I've done some seller financing. I seller financed a 120-unit apartment complex. Seller financed all kinds of different sizes of apartment buildings and single families and stuff like that. And then, of course, the syndication.
Oh, sorry, can I ask questions yet, or do you want
Yep, so questions are great. I don't want to be talking the whole time, so
Okay,
ask me
here's my
questions.
question. So, out of all of those things, if you were going to start over again today, knowing what you know now, what would you start with, and why?
Man, it's really a question that's really hard to answer because I know what I know now, right? So I have the same knowledge that I have this knowledge that I have now. So what would I start with right now with the knowledge that I have would be multifamily syndication. But at the same time, it's hard to start that way, and it might not be for everyone. So some people, it can be a good step to go into doing multifamily syndication. Now, I would say you probably want to find a good team, right? You want to find potentially some good partners. It's not necessarily a step that you go from not knowing anything about real estate to buying a 250-unit apartment complex with a bunch of investors, right?
Why not?
Yeah. So
private danger.
I know.
Credibility, but there's a lot. So how would I start? I mean, I don't want to necessarily answer that because I could sit here and talk for hours on different ways to get started in real estate. There's so many different ways. What you got to figure out is what's the best path for you, and try to make sense of that. So there's so many different ways. I mean, Jordan just talked. He's got some smaller stuff, and now he's got 20 units, so he's buying mid-sized multifamily. He skipped a lot of that, buying the little stuff, flipping, all that kind of stuff. But it worked for me. I don't know. Darren has got a lot of real estate. Has been in the business for 30 years.
I started in
Real
mobile
quick.
homes and single families, yeah, and if I had it to do over again, I would partner with who eventually became my mentors and do it faster.
Yeah.
Because the credibility gets there faster.
Right.
Or
I think-
build a team and have money, if you build a team, or the right team and have money, backing you, then there's a possibility for you to enter the game. If
Yeah.
you don't, then they're gonna laugh you out of the game, literally.
And I think that's the biggest key, right? If you want to accelerate your business, it's all about being here, right? It's all about building that network and building the team, because you can't just go and do it by yourself. So the faster you want to scale, the more you have to actually have people around you.
This is the reason why I like people like Todd, because people like Todd are people like me. And that they wanna genuinely want, and so is Jordan, genuinely wanna help other people and are growing themselves and continue to grow. So that's one of the main reasons why you'll always see me at meetings like this, even though I don't need to be here.
So when you guys talk about a team, what people make up that team? What are you looking for? Everyone brings something different to the table, I assume.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it all depends on where you're going, what your skill sets are. But the most important part of a team is you're finding people that can fill your holes, right? Everybody's got different gaps.
Yeah.
Your gap might be that, you don't know how to operate a multifamily property. Maybe you know how to network and raise money and do all that. That's the easy thing for you. Well, then don't find that team member, because that's you. But maybe you don't know how to find the deals. Okay, so find somebody that can
And
help.
that's the same for syndication too? I mean, it's
Absolutely.
the same
yeah.
as a.
Yeah, so syndication, all syndication is raising money to buy something, right? In my instance, we're buying real estate, and mainly multifamily real estate. So that's all it is. Syndication is a business in itself. You have to treat it like a business, but our end game is to buy that piece of property, right? So the same rules apply, right? And I think probably even more important when you're starting to do like a syndication, because now with the syndication, you're dealing with other people's money. And you better take that serious. Because if you don't, not only are you going to have a lot of people mad at you, but you might end up spending some time with people you don't want to spend time with. And taking showers with people you don't want to take showers with. So make sure you can handle other people's money, and that's really important, right? If you're going to go buy a 200-unit building by yourself and you've got all kinds of money, I don't care what you do, right? Go ahead and screw it up and I'll buy it from you. But if you're dealing with other people's money, do it right. So getting that to you, no problem. So before we even get into syndication, I want to talk quick about what you need to think about. In my opinion, syndication is just one little piece of it. We need to know where we're going and what our end game is. Knowing how we're going to get there, knowing our strengths and weaknesses, and what gaps we need to fill. It allows you, if you really understand your end game, it allows you to dissect to achieve that greatness, whatever you're doing. So in my opinion, you need to know where we're going. And that can always pivot and change. It's not like you're etching this into a stone and that's the only thing you can do. Market shift, opportunities change. Everybody needs to be agile, but understanding where you want to go. We basically are talking about this. Here's some of your team, it can be partners, right? It can be mentors. You can be, the beautiful thing about buying a 250-unit apartment building or a large commercial piece of property is it's got big cash flow, right? So it's got a lot of zeros. So when you buy something big that has a lot of zeros, you can bring partners in and you still have a lot of zeros at the end of the day. Maybe not quite as many because you're chopping that down, but it still works. So that's the nice thing about buying larger buildings is we can bring in some of those partners to really make sure we're not making those mistakes. So realtors, lenders, property managers, contractors, mentors, passive investors, appraisers, accountants, attorneys, inspectors, and so on.
Sorry, I have a lot of questions.
That's good.
Okay, so I didn't say this when I introduced myself, but I'm looking at purchasing our first syndication over $100, or over 100 units. And so the question that I have is, when you partner with this great team of people who have experience, how can your role shift and evolve as you do more deals together? So for example, if you're the person that brings the network of investors, are you always in that role, or can you also pivot to like the deal finder role?
Well, you can, certainly you can pivot. I mean, you can do what your strengths are, honestly. I mean, the most important part is to figure out what your strengths are, though, and fill those gaps, right? So, sure, can you add some more things? You could, but does that make sense? You know, maybe not. You have to figure that out yourself, what makes the most amount of sense. Right? Most people want to take roles away, right?
What do you mean?
Well, most people, when they start their own business, they're the money raiser, they're doing, you know, they're wearing so many hats. And they want to, as they expand, they realize, hey, I can't go and buy more and more properties and be the asset manager and be the money raiser and be this and this and this. I got to find smart people around me to do some of those
To
things.
help you scale it.
And and if that means I got to give a little bit more of the profit away, that's fine, because in the end of the day, I can accelerate my business so that that percentage that I give away in the one property, everything combined still adds up to a greater whole.
Okay.
Right. So
Thank you.
typically, you're trying to give things away.
If you're doing everything, it's impossible for you to expand your infrastructure, so
Absolutely.
Right.
it's impossible for you to grow to any significant size. So you gotta build a team.
Yeah, there's great people out there that'll, I mean, there's access VAs, virtual assistants, you know, access, the most important person you can get ever in your business is your first assistant. And that's gonna like totally set you free. At least for me it did. Finally, when I got my first assistant, I was like, holy cow, what a world of difference.
Well, I was just thinking about this team building and that slide you had before, and you were talking about partners, and you were talking about, then you had your team, and then you had underneath there, what was the other one? Your investors? Hire people.
Yeah.
So I listen to a podcast all day long, you know, this team building things, you know, you hear it all the time, and just, you know, it's interesting, like, that one list, like, the, you know, your team, the realtor, lender, blah, 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 that's like people that maybe it's a fractional thing, where you're bringing them maybe 5% or less of their business. And then,
potentially.
whereas maybe somebody, if you have somebody who's like, you know, working to find investors, maybe that would be almost a full-time thing for them.
Yeah. Look, I mean, every team member, whether they're your employee, whether they're a subcontractor of yours, or whether they're just this broker, right, that's bringing you properties, are extremely important. A broker is going to find you some great properties. And brokers want to work with people that can actually do the deal, and they're confident in that. So having good brokers around you is extremely important part of your business. Yeah, granted, you're only going to buy 1, 3, 5 properties a year, and they might sell 30, 40 or more, but they want to know that whoever they bring the property to the very first time is going to close on the deal. And so they're going to bring it to you if you prove to them that you can.
The upside
build
here,
those relationships.
The upside here is once you close, and you can be a part of a team, you don't have to be just you that closes 2 or 3 deals, then you're in the game. You're in the bigger game.
Right.
And you have credibility.
So you don't have to go, like,
You could be a
befriend all of
co-sponsor.
these people on your own if you have a team.
You could be a co-sponsor in several deals and then eventually take over being a sponsor if you choose to.
Look,
or you
if
could just continue to be co-sponsor.
If you're out there working with brokers and you're partnering with a few reputable companies, it's easy for you to use their name to help build that
Oh,
relationship.
yeah.
If you raise money for a deal and do some stuff and become a partner in that deal, a small part of the general partnership or whatever, large part of the general partnership, you can use that deal that you closed on, even if you only own 5% or 10% overall, you can still use that as your experience and your credibility. So it just helps snowball that. Every time I close on the property, I get calls from local brokers that are around, and they, every time after I close, I get probably 3 or 4 brokers that call me and talk to me about the deal that I just did, and they're trying to find you more deals because they know you can perform.
I have so many questions. Okay, so you're part of a team, you have this great network, but how do you stay in front of the people that are on your team so you become that household name? Do you put them on a drip marketing campaign so every time you close something they get an email so they know to call you? Do you take them out to lunch so you can see the white in their eyes? Like, do you go golfing with them? Do you fly out to
Sure.
like
So
cities?
here's
Sorry, that was
first of all, I mean, you have to meet them
Right.
face to face.
Right.
That's extremely important. Or somebody on your team does, right? Let me just give you my broker example, okay? So I invest in properties in Ohio and Kentucky and Minnesota, but mainly right now Ohio and Kentucky. So I've got a list of brokers that are important in those areas, okay? And on that list, I've got the names of brokers, and then I've got different ways I reach them: social media, text, phone call, email. Okay, you can do face-to-face if you want to, however you want to do it. If they're local, face-to-face might work. So each week, reach them in one way, right? So you're reaching them somehow each week. And so all I do is we have our spreadsheet, and we just have those items, and we just click on the week and when we hit that contact. It might be as simple like I go onto the Facebook page. One of my brokers loves art, right? He loves taking pictures, and so he'll post pictures on Facebook of something he took, and so I like it. I might make a comment on it, and then they're amazing pictures. So there's always something to comment on anyway. So I'll make that comment, I'll like them, do whatever. That's a reach, right? A lot of people aren't going to that extent. Send them a quick text. You read an article, right? If you're looking in the Twin Cities and you find an article on the Twin Cities about why multifamily is, doing really well, or some new company that came in that's going to really help expand and be positive to multifamily, send this article. Just shoot an email to them. Hey, I read this, thought of you. Bam. That's another reach. So don't be obnoxious, but always be contacting them.
Does that include like sending handwritten cards? Or is
Sure.
that very old school?
I think corny is cool.
Yeah.
Seriously, corny is cool. I mean, people try not to be corny and they get forgotten about.
Be
I don't-
persistent, right, but not annoying.
Yeah, be
Right.
persistent, not annoying, right? If
Yeah,
you're
yeah.
if you're sending them handwritten cards like once a week, they might be
Like still ridiculous.
this person's a
Yeah.
weirdo. But if you send them a handwritten, card around Christmas or at their birthday or something like that, it's pretty cool. They don't get that very often. You want to
sending
be,
emails too to the right people.
yeah,
Even if they don't respond, they're reading them and they appreciate that and
Right.
they take it in. So
Right.
don't think just because you're not getting a response immediately or even at all, that they're not thinking of you or put you front of mind, even if they don't respond.
you want to be the name on the whiteboard they've got, and they've got their preferred 20 investors or 10 investors. You want to be one of those names. That's what you.
The top broker producer is super busy
Yeah.
because they're so productive. Is that not a fair statement?
Every market has one, maybe two,
Yeah.
that are the top and by far the top. And then the rest of them are underneath.
I don't know a market in the top 5 in the country, major market, where there are more than one handful, anywhere.
Yeah.
That
There's,
are the
there's
most
more than a
popular.
handful, but more than a handful of true performing brokers,
yeah.
right? Twin Cities, I can name off 20 different, agents, brokers, but only a few of them are doing 95% of the business.
Right.
The other, five of them do 95% of the business. The other 15, they do the 5%.
Right.
That's just how it is. So, not that you just want to forget about them, but those are the brokers that do less business. They might not need that weekly reach. They might need a little less.
And they're not gonna value it as much, honestly, because it's that right mindset that makes the top 5 or 3 or 2 as productive
Right.
as they are.
This is super important when we're talking about syndications, building systems, right? Streamlining, trying to do things right, trying to create processes that make everything work so much more smoothly. Your investors want communication. So if you can figure out more and more ways to communicate with them and easier, that's gonna make it, your whole business that much better. The more systems, the more kind of things you can do just to streamline your business, the better everything's gonna run. You wanna look professional when you're not ever touching their money, but when you're taking that money and putting it to work, they wanna know that their money's being taken care of. And, if things are Mickey Mouse, they're just not gonna wanna keep on doing business with you. Megan, do you have a question?
Sorry. Okay, so what tech stack do you recommend? Like, I think it's IMSS, or do you recommend like a Hootsuite so that everything's scheduled so that you don't have to do that kind of stuff? Do you use a CRM? Do you use a content management tool like MyChip or?
I mean, I don't want to get too much in the weeds with that
Okay,
stuff,
sorry.
but I use Calendly to schedule stuff. I've got an investor portal that my investors can go to, and I did start with the investor portal, but now I use an investor portal. I use MailChimp, all that kind of stuff. So I think using some of that stuff is really important. Just I wouldn't get too carried away with trying to get like everything, right? Because people try to get too techy, and then it just causes, in my opinion, more confusion, at least if you're like me.
When you're setting up a deal, what sort of return on investment?
I'm gonna get there.
Okay, we're gonna.
Yeah.
I'll stop asking questions so you can get there.
Yeah, maybe I'll get there. Depends on how many.
I know, I just lied.
We can stay till
Lie to
2
yourself,
a.m.
don't lie to us.
All right, so this is super important for syndications, right? Because you can't do a syndication if you don't have anybody's money to be able to have to invest, right? So you've got to surround yourself with successful people, add value to them, focus on them and not on you, build very purposeful relationships, and then extremely important, make sure you're staying in contact with them, right? And again, I have different ways to try to stay in contact with my investors. I've got the MailChimp that we send out emails. I do some phone calls, just trying to stay in contact with, being in meetups like this, going to different conferences that I know. 3 weeks ago, I flew out to San Francisco and Los Angeles, and I held a couple meetups, met a lot of my investors, just made sure I had that connection with them. So it's really important, in my opinion, to always be building relationships, but make sure when you build them, you focus on them and not you. That's going to be really important. Adding value to people is going to get you so much farther than trying to take value. And then, of course, thinking big. You hear a lot of you guys wanting to skip the single family, go right to multifamily. Great. In my opinion, starting small is just fine, but then going up as quickly as you can. Right? Get outside your comfort zone. Make mistakes.
Are all of your investors accredited investors, or are some of them?
Yes, a little bit of both. Most of them are accredited.
What are you doing to maybe like, maybe vet the non-accredited so you don't maybe get yourself in trouble with the?
I have a lot better relationships with the non-accredited, or try to make sure I have a lot better relationships.
What's your, do you have a stand, like, I need to see this person 3 times, because you have to build that relationship, right, but it's kind
Yeah,
of a gray area.
first of all, you want to understand, do they understand what they're getting into, right? And both with accredited and non-accredited, but more importantly with non-accredited. Do you understand, like, do they understand what they're getting into? Do they have any experience in real estate or in owning a business? You know, and do you know them? Have you met with them face to face? Have you had several meetings? Have you known them? For my non-accredited, my rule now is that I have to know them for at least 9 months before I present anything to them. For my non-accredited. Now that's SEC you're above and beyond, right? SEC, I think there's no actual rule, but kind of the gray area that I've heard is about 3 months. But you want a pre-existing relationship with them. I have, in the past, taken a few non-accredited investors that I didn't know as well as maybe I should. You know, they probably passed the smell test with the SEC, but I don't care what the SEC thinks as long as I'm following what they think. I want to make sure it's good for my investment too. So I've got one investor right now. If he asked to invest in one of my deals again, I would tell him no. He's not accredited, and there's a reason I wouldn't take him. I'm not going to go through the details or name any names, but you want to make sure you're comfortable with the people that are investing.
How many times do I have to apologize to you for that?
Do they have the money?
I'm right here.
When Darren came to me and he said he wanted to invest, he wanted to invest $45,000, and I forgot to ask him how much money he actually has. Darren had $44,000. He borrowed $1,000 from his mom just to do the deal.
And she is bitchy about this.
Now he wants his money back.
What do you look for in an investor?
What do you look for in an investor? Somebody who's honest and ethical, obviously. You want that. You want somebody that has, in my opinion, similar goals as you, right? Where are their expectations? You want to understand and make sure they understand the expectations of the investment. I also want an investor who's understands the risks involved. I like investors that know real estate, that have done real estate themselves, because right, sometimes things get rocky in a real estate transaction. Sometimes things aren't perfectly as planned. Believe it or not, every once in a while, a contractor doesn't get the job done right on time. I know it's hard to believe. I'm sorry. But sometimes they don't get the job done on time, and sometimes they even go over budget. So if you've got investors that have been in business and in real estate or in real estate, they understand it. If you've got an investor who's never really invested outside of stocks, bonds, and mutual funds, they might be a little more high maintenance if things do go wrong or even a little sideways or anything like that. Now, will I still take them? Sure, but you want to, I think, have investors that understand and have good values. You know.
Todd, can we follow up with this, the final piece of this question?
Yeah. Sorry. What was the?
It's a paperwork thing. So if you're doing a proper syndication or what the more sophisticated levels of raising money that follow that, it starts with syndication, and you've got 2 different identifiers that you're going to file your private placement memorandum with the SEC. Now, one of those filings, they're lettered 506B and C, and one allows you to market to anybody, and you don't have to validate whether they're, market to anybody in the open market. You have to then verify yourself. You're responsible for verifying whether they're accredited or not.
Yeah.
The second one, you don't. If they sign the documentation, the PPM, the accredited investor questionnaire, for example, and they tell you they're sophisticated, your responsibility ends right there.
They self-certify.
Yeah, they self-certify.
But you can't advertise.
So, but I would be careful with that even so. You want to understand who they are, right?
Right.
Because first of all, you want to have that relationship already built. Yes, they do self-certify. If you've got a non-accredited that says they're accredited and you know they're non-accredited, I wouldn't allow them to check the box. I would make sure they said they're non-accredited. Like, kind of press the envelope. In my opinion, it's better to be safe. Yeah, so 506B allows you to have up to 35 non-accredited investors in your investment. 506C has to have only accredited investors, and they have to actually go through a verification process to verify if they're accredited. 506C, I can advertise on, I can put it on Facebook and all kinds of stuff. Like, there's still, do you know all the rules? You're an attorney.
Roughly, I mean,
Yeah.
the thing about C
There's
is
still
you-
regulations,
Yeah.
but
I mean, the intent of the advertisement has to be towards only accrediteds, and you have to be
Right.
clear that you're only marketing and making your opportunity available for accrediteds, but then you can do a more general solicitation.
And you are responsible then, you're liable if they turn out not to be accredited. The SEC, a good attorney coming after you is gonna hold you
yeah,
responsible.
yeah, I've heard the same thing, and so I would tend to agree
That's,
with
I'm
that.
only telling you the
because-
feedback from attorneys, so
Well,
I'm
then
not
you
an
gotta worry about the
attorney.
bad attorneys that will sue you for anything anyway.
So
Just
Yes,
do
but-
what he does, stay way clear of the
Right.
boundaries.
Or
That's
get
So-
an
so-
exemption when you're
Right.
allowed to.
So there's third parties that'll actually accreditate your investors. So you can accreditate your investors through their accountant. Their own accountant can give them that accreditation validation. But if you're worried about getting sued and you think, my butt's on the line here, if they're truly not accredited, well then why trust their accountant, right? Have the third party actually verify. Now, some people get annoyed with that, right? So some people, you'll turn people off by doing a 506C because they're going, I don't want to go through this process. I don't have time to go through this BS. So that is a turnoff that I've heard of people have problems with.
There are now new insurance products that we're looking at. There's a company called Assurely that is starting to offer an insurance product for specifically investment crowdfunding. But it's designed as a policy that protects you, the issuer, against a shareholder action, as well as protecting them, protecting the investor against outright fraud for the first year.
We'll mention it during our.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, have you ever raised an excess amount of money just on a holdback, just to make somebody whole if they get kind of squirrely in the first, just give them a check back, or?
I haven't raised an excess amount of money, but if I had an investor come to me and it was early on, we could get them out pretty easily.
We overcapitalize everything.
But we overcapitalize, but we don't.
Depends on the size of the deal.
It depends on the risk of the deal too.
That's true, that's another variable, absolutely.
You always want to overcapitalize on a deal. If you're gonna raise a deal, first of all, so I just did a $3 million raise, and I raised 3.3 million for it. Okay, I didn't take the 3.3 and put it in the escrow account, but I had commitments at 3.3 million. We've lost, people that have committed, about $120,000 right now. When we're done, everybody's already in, but so we've lost about $120,000. So the reason why we overraise is because we know that happens. Now that was pretty good, $120,000 on $3 million raises, I think pretty good. I pat myself on the back, but you want to make sure you're raising at least 10% more.
One thing you want to.
If somebody gets squirrely, then
Yeah.
those people will be gladly come in.
Capital calls are something you want to avoid down the road. with your
Try to
investors.
avoid those, yeah.
Stuff happens in the real world, that's just the reality of it. But by overfunding, you're going to avoid that most of the time.
Can you
having
explain
do
to
that.
people what the
So
capital call is?
I'm gonna go through that actually.
He's got it in a
I
slide.
think if we have time, I'm gonna pop that up. I've got the underwriting I did on the last deal, and I'll show the amount that it overfunded the deal and the reason why, so. Yeah.
In addition to places like this and meetups and other places, where do you find these investors that, accredited, not accredited, just investors in general, that would be interested to be part of the syndication if you're newish?
Yeah, so good question. First of all, try to do a couple things. First of all, pick what you're going to do, right? So conferences and events are great. Maybe you want to host a podcast. I host a podcast. There's a reason I host a podcast, and it does drive investors. I purposefully go onto podcasts, and it does drive investors. That's a good source. Maybe you want
Todd,
to
do you
write.
think that's because you have such a sultry voice?
Right. He's like, do you have
face for radio?
I got a great face for radio. Yeah. You know, maybe you want to write. Maybe you like writing, so you write some blogs, articles. You get on Forbes and write for them, and bigger pockets and all that kind of stuff. I think that thought type leadership is definitely a good source. It's challenging for a beginner because you don't have the experience, but you can still, there's a lot of, you can still write blogs and articles on other people's experiences, right? Just piggyback off theirs. Don't try to pretend it's yours, but purposefully write about somebody else and their successes and failures and stuff like that. Or on your podcast, interview people that have had successes and failures. So be very, dedicate to what you're gonna be doing. Also, I would try to pick a niche. Choose who can you most speak to, right? Maybe you can speak to, maybe you know a lot of airline pilots, and you know a lot about that industry. Okay, well then start speaking to those types of people. Start getting into that industry. There's a great book called Networking with the Affluent, and that's what that book is about, how to network in certain groups. Everybody talks about doctors, let's network in their groups. I was talking to Megan earlier, network with,
Sailing
with
clubs
women.
or women.
Yeah, specifically women with either high net worth or high net worth husbands. So that probably wouldn't work for me, right? Because I'm not a woman. But that works if you're a mom and you're going to want to network with moms, and so there's just pick a niche. I think that's really important too. Getting yourself out there, put yourself out there. That's super important. And like I said before, add value to everybody you're trying to deal with. Add value. You go to these networking events and you see people that networking events suck in general, right? Go to network.
Especially this one. God, do they ever?
Go to networking events that have a purpose, right? Like the general networking groups where everybody's trying to throw their business cards at each other. Those are terrible. You always go to that networking event and you got the one guy that's got his business cards out and like, the business card ninja guy. And where do those business cards go? Every time they go in the trash, right? You throw those in this pocket because that's where the people you don't want to talk to ever again go. This pocket has the people you like. So you see me put your business card in this pocket. I didn't really mean that, by the way.
This time.
Yeah, this time.
I'd say also just talk to everybody you meet.
Yeah.
Like I graduated from St. Cloud State in a real estate degree, and we have a huge alumni network. And we had a happy hour last night actually, and I was talking to a commercial appraiser who does apartment buildings, and found out that him and a buddy were like thinking about buying an apartment building. So it's like literally people you don't think are into syndicating or owning properties, they probably are or know somebody who is.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. Like, for me, it's going to a mom's group because that's the season of life I'm in, and just talking to them about life, and inevitably it comes up. What are you doing right now? Like,
You'd be surprised where people will come from. I mean, I had one of my friends' daughters was picking up picking up his daughter, they were playing at the house, and he travels a lot for business, and I said something about flying, because I just got back from a trip, and he's like, oh yeah, what do you do? And I said, well, I buy apartment complexes. Really? Do you ever take investors? I said, well, yeah, sure. Put me on your list. And this guy's very well to do. And so we talked a little bit and had a good conversation. I was just at a charity gala, and the same thing. A guy came up, we were talking. He's like, I've seen you on Facebook. You post some stuff on real estate. Is that what you do? And we got to talking. And he's an investor and a pretty good investor. So stuff like that happens. You have to put yourself out there. Are we good to go? Huh? All right. So I want to talk real quick. These are some questions you should ask yourself if you're going to want to do syndications. Okay. First of all, are you able to underwrite or find somebody on your team that can underwrite conservatively and properly operate the asset? Can you actually come up with a business plan and execute on that business plan? Okay. Do they have the experience necessary, and have you built a team? Okay. So that's really important. Again, where we talk about filling your gaps. Okay. Can you communicate effectively with your investors? Super important. There's nothing that pisses people off more than never being talked to. Okay. Are you able to treat other people's money better than your own? What would you do if stuff went wrong? Are you going to put your money at risk before your investors? What are you going to do? That's really important. How are you going to treat their money? How are you going to try to protect their investment? Are you willing to put your own money into the deal and take that risk? Really important, in my opinion. Some people don't put their money in the deal. I personally think it's really important to put your own money in the deal. How much? That's up to you. I have an investor minimum. My minimum is $50,000 on a typical deal. I will always put at least the minimum, but typically quite a bit more than that.
Question. So when you say put your own money in, do you mean the acquisition fee just folds into the LP side?
I mean, you could do that, right?
Would that count for your criteria?
Yeah, I guess that would count. I always put more than that.
Okay.
But
yeah, that would be called, that's delaying your rewards.
Yeah.
So as the
it's true
project
money.
manager, yeah. Yeah, because you're going to get that money when it's successful anyway, and if you defer that, it's called deferment.
And that can be a great return and a good investment, because if you're doing a nice size raise, and let's say you take a 2% acquisition fee on a $10 million purchase, now you've got a few $100,000 that are invested into that property. That is your money, right? I mean, you had the 2% acquisition fee. Just because you didn't take and put that into your bank account and then play with it for a while and then invest, it doesn't mean it's not your money.
Property managers do this when they want to be part of the investment team. Contractors do this when they're the same. It's putting sweat equity that they would earn money, and they take that money, defer it, and create an ownership position in your deal.
And there's a great strategy, and it sometimes is really good. Sometimes depends on who you've got on your team, but your property manager oftentimes will take a little bit of a haircut on their fees to be part of the deal, where they know that likely if it performs well, they're going to actually get a better return anyway. Same thing with contractors. Sometimes contractors will give a pretty nice discount if you give them some of the ownership. So keep that in mind as you're putting these deals together. Even your attorney, potentially, they're setting up all the syndication stuff, and maybe those documents and all that, if they're doing all the closing, the syndication, if they're doing everything, that might cost you $30,000+. Well, now that potentially they're willing to just not take any money up front. That all goes into the deal. So there's ways to save some money and make everybody happy.
You're probably gonna get to this and stuff, but I'm curious, like when you say, they take 1% or whatever. So some people, when you syndicate, you raise the money, you buy the property, that money stays in for how long? That initial purchase, that equity there. How long does that stay in? Are they taking a piece of the yearly revenue from the rental? I mean, I'm just curious how all that revenue is shared and.
It can depend on how you set it up.
Yeah.
Right? So like a property manager, they're charging you, let's say, a 4% fee on the collected revenue. Well, if they discount it to a 3% fee, and you say, well, for that, if you'll discount it to a 3% fee, I'll give you whatever, 8% of the general partnership.
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's for no money, they got 8% of the general partnership. You can't give them the limited partnership, because the limited partnership is the money. So I'll cover that real quick. You've got the limited partnership, which is your money to buy the building. Your down payment, your reserves, all that kind of stuff. Then you've got the general partnership, and the general partnership are the chiefs, right? So that's who's running the deal. So the property manager, you could give them whatever, 5%, 8%, 10%, whatever is a good deal for both of you guys. They wouldn't have to put any money in. So their money
So that's the,
comes in like monthly distributions, quarterly distributions, however they distribute.
It's a great way for you to add credibility when you're newer too to your team, to your model. Great way. Because you bring a contractor in that's got decades of experience, you're gonna shine.
And now you could put them as a partner on the PPM, you know, your business, your business plan, all that kind of stuff. They're there as partners with you, and your investors are gonna potentially like that a lot more, especially, as Darren said, if you're newer.
Yeah.
So are the limited partners, are they long-term investors? They tend to be
They're in the deal until the deal sells or refinances.
That's what I
In
was
my
wondering.
deals, you can set up however you want.
Okay, so you're not going in saying, listen, this is the deal, we're gonna buy this, rehab it, and in 5 years
So
we'll refi out and.
So my LPs are in the deal, actually, they're in the deal until it sells. If we refinance and they get even 100% of their money back, they're still in the deal until it sells. They just now have no principal.
Oh, I see. But they're still realizing their revenue.
They're still
streams
getting
from it.
revenue.
Their return at that point is infinite because he's returned their
Sure.
original. That's where you want to get your investors as quickly as possible, to have a zero sum in the game, and now their ownership just keeps growing.
Yeah, sure.
You can set, so
Infinite
I'm
cash.
gonna
it's
talk.
kind of like VC funding for the tech industry, where
Yeah,
if
except
you do
VCs take way more than we do.
Right. Okay.
They're sharks.
where you have like an A fundraise and then like eventually all those people. Okay, got it.
You can set these up, a syndication, you can set up the payouts, the partnership agreement, the percentage splits, the acquisition fees. I'm gonna talk about all that stuff. What I'm gonna talk about is kind of what I do. What other people do is all over the board. It's honestly, it's what works for the deal and what works for your investors.
To finish his
And what's
question-
legal, of course.
To finish his question, the LPs are your equity investors only. In the GP side is where you can add ownership for your professionals.
So there's basically kind of two revenue pools. One is from the initial
One is sweat
capital
equity,
raised.
not revenue. One is sweat equity, the other is the cash to do your deal.
But really for the investors, though, there's two revenue streams. One is their cash in, you know, what the whatever appreciation of that investment is, and then the other is the ongoing rental. or
Yeah, it's
operational.
their revenues is the distribution, so you have quarterly or monthly, however you set it up, you have distributions on the cash flow, and then when the property sells, you have a distribution on the back end, that's the profit.
Got it.
That's whatever appreciation, mortgage pay down, all that kind of stuff.
And returns you give them until they fully realize their original capital investment are not taxable because they're seek counsel of a CPA.
Yeah, sure, right.
But they're not, because I'm not, but I've done enough deals.
But
I hope
essentially,
to know.
you're returning their principal.
You're returning
not
their
their-
principal, so
yeah.
it's not a profit position for them, so they're not gonna be taxed on it when they have the proper tax professionals.
And if you do it right, and you accelerate depreciation if you want to, you can give amazing tax breaks to your investors as well. That's outside of syndication, but I mean, yeah, there's cost segregation studies that you can do on your building, which really help depreciate the asset, which then helps offset income for your investors. And they get a K1 at the end of the year, and that will show a negative, that will show the building lost money even though they've got whatever, $10,000 worth of distributions.
Right. Okay.
It's a great thing about real estate investing. This country was founded by real estate investors, so.
But you have to recapture all that when you sell it, right? All the depreciation.
Yes and no, Ron.
Yeah, yes and no. I mean, right, it also, if you 1031 it, I mean, obviously.
Okay.
That's what I was
Sure,
gonna ask
no.
you, Todd, have you done 1031s yet?
I haven't 1031.
Because you hold a little longer
Yeah,
in your
yeah.
years.
So, 1031 also is difficult on a syndication, but you can also change your model. And I haven't done this, so don't quote me on how it's done. But you can change your shares over to like a DST model or a TIC, tenants in common, and then it's a lot easier to do a 1031 exchange.
On a syndication,
But-
if you're not TIC, that's being the TIC is the only way to 1031 smoothly through.
Unless everybody.
That never happens.
happens.
I had a question.
You can't get that many people to agree on anything. You can't get your family members to agree on where to go to dinner.
I had a question with that last slide. I think it was number 4. It said treat investors' money better than your own. Besides being, careful, doing your due diligence and giving like preferred returns, is there other options or like?
Yeah, I mean, be honest, be ethical. Just make sure the investments you're investing in are, like you said, just if you go, I would take this risk with my own money. Don't be sloppy with somebody else's money. So it's just being honest, being ethical, being conservative. Most investors, they want to make money, right? But they want to preserve capital. If they give you $100,000, they're going to be maybe not pumped and happy if you give them only $100,000 back at the end of the investment. But if you give them $80,000 back, then now we're talking bad deal, right? So most investors, their goal is to preserve capital. Do they want to make money? Sure. They understand most of them understand business isn't always perfect and some things do happen. So if you said, hey, we're going to make a 15% return on your investment and you make them 8, they're not going to be jumping up and down, happy, but you preserved their capital.
Yeah.
So can you do that? All right, so how much should I give away? Question I get asked a lot. I think most investors are looking at getting like a simple annualized cash on cash return. So that's your monthly or quarterly distributions. I do quarterly distributions. So that's your 7 to 9% cash on cash. Now, hopefully more if you can, but if you're able to hit these, most investors are going to be fairly happy. Can you give them, 15% return on investment overall over the life of it? And I shouldn't have put just return, annualized return. It's 12 to 15% IRR, which is a little different. I'm not going to go into the whole formula of an IRR, but IRR is basically taking into consideration the time value of money, because we're giving them a distribution quarter 1, quarter 2. We're not giving them the full thing. Equal distributions throughout. The very end distribution is usually way bigger than anything in the middle, right? Because we're selling the property. So, never guarantee returns. Super important with syndication. Don't ever say we're promising you these returns, or these returns are what you should or what you're expecting. I would say these are, these returns are our goals. This is what we're projecting. Be careful about the verbiage that you use. You don't want to promise anything. All right, so I already talked about that. So how's the GP, why is the GP paid? GP is paid for putting the deal together, operating the deal, signing the loans, and executing the business plan.
Can one person be on both sides?
Usually one person is on both
They
sides.
are both sides. So you can give money and be putting the deal together.
Yeah, that's if you have hard cash in your own deal, yeah. Or on both
So
sides.
usually, so as a GP, you get paid for doing this.
Yeah.
You don't get paid, You don't put money into the GP. You put money into the LP.
And not everybody has to put it into the LP though. You said there's some people that don't put money into their own deal,
Some
right?
people
There's some
don't.
people that don't, okay.
I don't agree with it, but some
Yeah.
people don't.
Okay.
I
But
wouldn't
I'm not
invest
gonna,
with somebody that didn't have some skin in the game.
Right.
So did you disclose that you have skin in the game? Sorry, I wasn't gonna ask you that question.
yeah, I always tell
do
my
you-
investors, and
Do you
quite
tell
frankly.
them how much? I know, I'm sorry.
Do I tell them how much eventually? Yeah, but
Okay.
you know, like when I'm doing, so when I did my last presentation,
Yeah.
I do a webinar to all my investors, so everybody can listen live to the webinar. I record it and they can go and listen to it later. But I think that question was asked, how much money are you putting in the deal? And at the time, I didn't know exactly how much, so I just gave a range on how much I was putting in the deal. And I actually ended up putting more than even the range in the deal, but yeah, I think it's important to tell them that you're putting money into the deal and how much.
When you're,
It's not required.
you're working with, 20+ units, what are your thoughts on like, using a local property manager versus building an in-house property management team to possibly add value instead of paying a property manager, a local property manager?
Again, it comes down to your strengths, right? Are you, and efficiency, right? So if it's your first deal, and well, it'd be hard to syndicate a 20-unit deal probably, but you could maybe do it. If it's your first deal, it probably makes more sense to have third party, especially if you're not a property management, that's not your expertise. When you're growing, oftentimes it makes more sense to have that third party when you're expanding, because you're focusing on expansion, you're not necessarily focusing on that property management. So it really depends. It's each company is different on how they want to do it.
Todd, do you know because I haven't been in acquisitions in quite some time, do you know the localized in the Minneapolis and Minnesota specifically, price per door average on a C-class?
Purchase price.
Yeah.
I don't know exactly.
Is it 40, is it 60, is it 80? What
No,
is it
like
today?
75 to 85.
75 to 85?
Yeah, depends on exactly where it's at. North Minneapolis, you might be able to find something for 60, 65.
So that's less than $2 million in property on 20 units right there. So that would be tough to syndicate, very difficult, because it's not enough, it's a low number.
It'd be good for crowdfunding.
It'd be great for crowdfunding, that's a good point.
Yeah, you can do it. I mean, for sure you can do it, but what you have to look at when you're doing a syndication, you have to look at your cost, right? So you've got attorney fees, you've got, your biggest cost is your attorney fees, right, to set up the syndication. And so does it make sense to syndicate a deal when you're only doing a $400,000 raise? In my opinion, no.
Well, I said 20 just to,
Yeah,
I think
no,
20
I-
is like the minimum to have to do an in-house property management company, from what I understand, but I know we're talking about like
That's
100,
not been
100
my
units.
experience. 3,200 units of B and C class acquisitions under my belts over a 10-year period before we exited out of it. And in my experience, no property management outside of yourself under 50 units. It's just not economically feasible in B and C class properties. That was my experience.
Say that again, no property management?
No, you would have to be, you couldn't have, it's not, most situations, it's not viable to have on-site management.
Yeah.
In anything under 50 units.
I think where third
You'd be
party.
doing it yourself. Can't support the salary, right?
Yeah, and I would even go as far as, 50 units is probably even quite small.
Yep, I
Unless
agree.
you're in a market like California where prices are really high, and, because you've got to have on-site staff, it takes a lot per door.
Yep.
You've got to look at your expense per unit. So kind of the typical rule is, like 75 plus, 100 plus is even better.
Yep.
For every 100 units, you have one leasing person and you have one maintenance person. That's why like buying a 100+ unit building is really nice, because you have that, think about it, you've got somebody on site at your property. They're there 5 days a week, they're there 40 hours or more, and you've got You've got two people, right? You've got a leasing person and you've got a maintenance person. So for every 100 units, you're looking at two people.
You gotta ask yourself, do you wanna buy a business or do you wanna buy a job? Do you wanna be self-employed?
So I own like 20 unit buildings, smaller buildings like that. They just, in my experience, now some of you out here I know have smaller buildings and maybe you have a different experience, but in my experience, they're difficult because you have a lot of units, but you have nobody that can be there every day, so you can't pay for that person. So in my opinion, if I were to buy a building, I'm gonna choose a 75 plus unit building, or I'm gonna choose a fourplex. I'm not gonna choose a 40 unit building. That's my opinion. But
So you're saying that the maintenance and the leasing, those are, when you say do it yourself, you're saying you're hiring an outside property management company that's not on premises, or are you saying you're actually doing it yourself?
Well, you're hiring people, right?
Yeah,
You're
yeah.
still hiring, right? So it's just a lot less efficient.
Yeah.
If you only have 20 units, you can't hire somebody full-time. You just can't, it's not, doesn't work. So like, I run into that problem right now. I've got a portfolio in the Twin Cities, 1 to 4 family buildings, and it's like I said, it's about 40, 50 units or so. I can't keep a maintenance person full-time. I can't keep a leasing agent full-time. So I'm always looking for different people. By the way, if anybody wants to do some leasing, I'm looking for somebody to help me do some leasing. So just give me a ring after this. So it's hard when you don't have somebody that can be there full-time. It just creates a different dilemma. It's not impossible. It just creates a different dilemma, a little less efficient.
People can get very creative with it. You can do that too, but it's going to be less profitable for you. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
Just as it costs you money that isn't naturally there. So.
But the other thing too, now the Twin Cities, I don't think this holds true with the Twin Cities because our market is white hot. But oftentimes you can buy the 15 unit building, 20 unit building for way better cap rates. So your cash flow, your cash on cash is better than the 150 unit building. So you have probably better cash on cash, higher risk though of losing that cash on cash, being more of a yo-yo.
There's a threshold of diminishing returns after a certain number of units. So just because you can buy 300, 350 units, 275, whatever, doesn't mean you should. You've got to determine your
So
threshold.
that's on the top, because it sounds like there's actually like a peak and then a valley and then another peak, and you're saying there's a threshold where it drops off at that
Where it
far end as
doesn't,
well?
you either don't make more money or you actually can be losing a little bit of money if you go over a certain number of units. More often than not, more frequently, is you're not making the time and the effort and the financing and everything and what you do to put together a deal and manage that process is not worth the returns you get on those excess units. So, I mean, you've gotta have the math.
Incremental units.
Incremental unit
Yeah.
additions, yeah, so you've gotta determine where that peak is for your comfort level, knowing yourself as an investor. To Todd's point early on, that goes back to the beginning statement he made, you've gotta know yourself as an investor. You gotta know what you're willing to put up with.
Somebody had a question.
I do.
Oh, Megan, you have a question?
Sorry, I'm so sorry, everyone. I don't want you to think I'm a liar.
Megan, stop apologizing, please.
Okay. So if you're not at that 75 unit or 100 unit threshold, can you get creative if you're at like 62 units? Can you share a property management
yeah.
company across
Yeah.
multiple different
Sure.
properties?
Absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
and that, I would suggest that too.
Okay.
You can
that's-
share it with other property owners too that you know.
Yeah,
Oh,
and
really?
that's,
Yeah?
that's what's beautiful about being in rooms like this, get to know people. People, I have a hard time keeping a maintenance person because I can only keep them part-time. And the other person is having the same grievance as you are.
Yeah.
And why not team up then? And now you have a full-time maintenance person between your 120 units that you own. And same thing with the leasing person. So if anybody has about 60 to 80 units, I'd love to talk to them. We can get a leasing person together. Okay, so Yeah, keeping somebody full-time employed is a lot easier than keeping somebody
Well, again, it's
part-time.
being a business owner rather than being
Right.
self-employed.
So you take out the first name.
Before you move into this slide,
Yeah.
are you gonna get to talking about like a loan, an actual commercial loan, and how this works with your syndication, or are you just raising all your money through syndication?
No, we get commercial loans. I can cover that real quick. That wasn't even something I was gonna cover, because that doesn't have to do with really the raise necessarily, but yeah, commercial loans, I mean, you're gonna get on an apartment building, if you're over $1 million on a stabilized building, what the loan is, you can get an agency debt. So it's like Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, 30-year fixed, like interest rates right now are like 4.5 to 4.8. You can lock it in for up to, you can lock it in for more, but typically it's between like 10 and 12 years. And then there's the bridge loan, there's local banks, if you live near the property. So if you're from the Twin Cities, you're buying a Twin Cities property, you can go with a local bank sometimes.
So these rates of return for your
They're
investors?
based with the loan included, so you're.
So it's on the 20 to 30% that you're financing through them?
Yeah, so whatever your financing is, let's say you can get 70% loan to value, which is achievable, 65 to 75% loan to value. Then the investors come up with the rest of the money. Now, there are syndications that'll do no loans.
Yep.
There's plenty of them.
They'll bring 10, 20, 30% themselves and then raise the rest and have no commercial.
Or do like 50% or 40%. I mean, yeah, there's plenty of companies. Most of the big REITs right now are doing their debt to equity is 30-40% right now. Most of these big REITs.
So, I'm curious, why would you want to do that, though? If you can borrow money from the government at 4%.
Safety.
Safety.
Yeah, more additional
And then you get
security.
the dividend too.
Additional security. They're not paying as high returns with the market returns overall
Yeah,
right
I mean,
now.
look, if you've got a bunch of investors that have a money problem and they want to put their money into real estate because it's safe, secure, and sound, you're going to buy an A-class building, right? New, nice, beautiful A-class building, very little, if no value add potentially, safe, secure, and you're going to have 50% or less on your loan. Super safe. How can you go wrong with that? How are you going to lose on that deal, right? Super safe deal. Your investors, are they going to make 20% IRR? No, like that's not even possible. But are they going to make 10% IRR? Likely. So they know their IRR fluctuations between 8% and 12%, and it's pretty much guaranteed. Where you invest in a value add, especially like a deep value add, your IRR could be 25, 35, 40%, but your IRR could also be zero.
If you had a fund and you were trying to get non-recourse debt, is the smallest down payment 35%, or what number would you have to come down with?
Non-recourse debt, you can go up to 80% loan to value, depending on the market, but it has to do with your debt service coverage ratio as well. And you're going to have reserves and all that kind of stuff and be a strong buyer. And it depends on the market. Twin Cities right now, very easy to get. Well, can you find a property that gets you the debt service? Probably not. But Fannie and Freddie love the Twin Cities. You can get a loan based on a trailing 1 month in the Twin Cities. So if your last 1 month is really good, they will lend on that last 1 month. And they'll give you up to 80% loan to value. I think actually 85 on A class, if I remember.
Affordable housing projects, they'll go
And
higher.
affordable housing, they'll go higher too, yeah.
Is that like the USDA?
100% on a right kind of affordable housing.
But that's not just Fannie, that's not agency.
No, I think that's the
It's
US
supported by, it has to be, it'll be supported by the local
supplemental.
government, supplemental funding is included.
Yeah.
So Fannie and Freddie will come in at a certain percentage, and then Minneapolis, for example, will contribute the rest.
So I don't know, what's the big company that has been buying a lot lately that's affordable housing company?
Dominion.
Not Dominion.
Doran?
Mint? No.
No. Yes, Aon. And you watch those, I don't know if you guys pay attention to those prices that they're buying at, but you're going, holy cow, how are they buying in that neighborhood for $180 a door? Like, it doesn't even make sense. Subsidies.
Yeah, tax
They
credits.
they know Aon and some of these other companies you guys mentioned, they know how to work the system. They know how to get these subsidies, they know how to do it, and they're good at it. Yeah, AEON, you know. They've been buying a lot, and they're buying for prices where you're just like, holy cow.
They buy all over the country.
Minneapolis is, I need to follow it, I need to look at it, but there is potential opportunity in Minneapolis to become, what they're doing right now is they're trying to basically do rent control, but they're not calling it rent control. What they're doing is making apartment owners, and this hasn't gone through yet, so it's trying to be pushed through. They're trying to make apartment owners actually tell the tenants, I think it's 3 months prior to selling the building, tell the tenants that the building's for sale, and then you also have to tell the city that it's for sale. And what that's gonna do is then the city's gonna, they're trying to get money then, and they'll have approved buyers that'll come in and be able to buy that building as long as they keep the rent at a certain level.
Is that like the NOAA fund thing?
No, that's a totally
That's
different
really different.
deal. Yeah. That's actually, the NOAA fund's a private deal with a bunch of banks.
And then is that?
So watch for that.
Is that gonna stop like off-market deals then?
That'll stop off-market deals in Minneapolis.
That's cool.
Wow.
That's not gonna, I'm a very optimistic person, but I'm also a realist. The brokers and the realtors aren't in love with that idea.
Minneapolis tried to approve the Section 8 requirement, they got sued, they lost. I think they'll get sued again if this goes through. Whether they'll win or lose, I can't tell you, but they'll get sued again if this happens. Yeah.
So there's a commercial version, the Realtors Association nationally is a very powerful influence at the state level and at the federal level. Well, there's a commercial version of that very same thing.
Yeah.
And it's one of the most, combined, they're the most powerful influence.
Yeah, that's definitely positive about Minnesota. I mean,
Of course
there's maybe some negatives here too, but there's some positive stuff. Like, the governments have not been able to walk all over landlords here. So, for as liberal as our state is, we're actually a pretty landlord-friendly state overall, in my opinion. You can evict a tenant in 25 or less days if you're on top of it.
You can do everything short of taking the front door off.
Yeah.
How do I know that? Because I did it and I got in trouble.
Don't take the front door off. So, I want to go through the syndication setup now. Again, this is more of me. You can do things differently. Everybody does it differently. So, this isn't like, if you write this down, this isn't what you have to do. Okay? Do it how you want to do it. And do it how, again, your investors' expectations. If they like your setup, if they like the returns and they like how everything's set, no problem. So, but I'm gonna, typically, the general partner, again, that's the general partner that doesn't put the money into it, they're putting the sweat equity into it. They're getting 20 to 30% of the pie, and the limited partners get somewhere between 70 and 80. Now, could it be 65, 35? Sure. Could it be even 60-40? Sure. Could it be 90-10? Sure. Okay. Could it be 50-50? Yeah, if you set it up right. The GP usually gets an acquisition fee. Acquisition fee is based on the purchase price or purchase plus renovation if you're doing like a big renovation build-out type thing. It's usually between 1 and 3%. Most of mine are about 2%. The GP then usually gets an asset management fee. That's based on the gross rents. Usually between 1 and 2%. Mine are usually between 1.5% and 2%. why the asset management fee? Well, we've got all kinds of expenses, right? So I pay an accountant, but my accountant does all of our properties. My bookkeeper takes care of all of our properties. All the software, that takes care of all the properties, right? If I fly and I'm going to visit several of my properties, I'm not gonna take and divide my plane ticket by, 3, 4, 5 properties. Same with my hotel and all that kind of stuff. So that takes care of that type of stuff. So you always have somebody also managing the asset. So you might actually hire a specific person to oversee the property, especially as you get bigger. As you're smaller, that's gonna be usually somebody in-house, but as you get bigger, you're gonna hire somebody to do it. Darren, when he had 3,500 units, my guess is you had a specific asset manager.
Yeah.
Or maybe even a couple.
Yeah.
So.
It depends on the size of the property and how many of our properties were close in proximity.
Yeah.
Sometimes we share that lot.
Yeah.
And is the asset management fee distributed monthly or is that quarterly like the?
Depends on how you set it up. I do it quarterly. Oftentimes there's a preferred return. The general partner waits to get paid until the investors get that preferred return. So let's say you're doing a 7% preferred return, okay? If I got a 7% preferred return, that means if you invested $100,000 into my deal, I'm giving you $7,000 that year before I take $1, okay? So if my overall raise was $1 million, I'm giving $70,000 to my investors before I take $1. Once we get to that $70,000, then we split 70-30 or however it was set up. Does that make sense?
Can you say it one more time, please?
One more time, okay? We got a preferred return of 7%. The investors get the first 7%. So if we got $1 million raise, $70,000 they get. If they put in $100,000, they get $7,000. That's on an annual basis. Then from there, we start our 70-30 split on the remaining profits. So if there's 0 remaining profits, I get paid nothing, right? I got my asset management fee, I get nothing else. But if there's an extra $100,000 in profit, then I make $30,000.
Do you ever do incremental increases in that profits for the GP? So if you go from 8% to 9% and so forth, you get a bigger chunk of the pie, which would be encouraging you to make it more and more profitable.
That's called a waterfall. I don't do those, but a lot of people do. I may in the future, I just haven't. The most common waterfall I see is at the end though. So we're basing it on the IRR in the end when we sell the property. So we say if the investors make, let's call it 15% IRR, then the waterfall maybe kicks in for the next percentage or next several percent. Now all of a sudden for the first 15%, it's that 70-30 split. For the next, maybe it's a 50-50 or 60-40.
I got it suddenly, sorry.
Sometimes there's a disposition fee, not always, depends. 1% or 0.5% or however you're set up. Again, this is all based on your investors' expectations, your expectations, and quite frankly, how good of properties you're finding.
Todd?
And how much risk.
Would you suggest that we not go chasing waterfalls? See what I did there?
That was amazing.
Isn't it? That's exactly.
I don't know. I know a lot of reputable companies that do waterfalls, and they like them, and I like rewarding my investors as well. So waterfalls maybe don't reward your investors quite as much.
Waterfalls are also more sophisticated and more complicated. So if you want to
confuses people.
It can, yeah, and a confused mind always says no.
Yeah, that's a good point. When you guys are setting these syndications up and you decide, hey, I want to do this, I want the acquisition fee, and I'm gonna add another fee, or I'm gonna, have all these crazy waterfalls in there. If the investor doesn't know what the heck is happening and they gotta ask too many questions, they're gonna start to tune out. And then you're gonna lose them. So the less probably questions they have to ask, the better. And that comes back to the communication too. I mean, that's why I do an investor webinar. I send them my business plan. I've got a Q&A sheet that I send out. So when I do my webinar, I'm also sending out a full business plan. It's like, basically 20-page business plan. What we're doing with the property, what's going on in the market, why we like the market, all kinds of stuff. Okay? I'm also sending out a Q&A, commonly asked questions by my investors, and then answers to those questions. I'm also sending out some referrals, so if they want to hear from what other investors have to say about our company, they can see that. We usually do video walkthroughs on the property while we're doing our due diligence. That way, if the investor wants to look at that, they can. Now, how many investors look at all of it? Probably only a couple, right? Most of them look at a couple things and they get comfortable. They're already comfortable with you. I've had some investors that don't look at any of it. I mean, I had one of my investors, he asked me a question on the property. It was right after I sent like an email update. This is while he already invested in it. I said, well, I just sent that email. Did you read it? He goes, oh, I don't read those. I trust you. So some people are like that. They trust you. But other people want that constant communication, and they want it simple and easy to understand. So my investors are given money three ways. One, paid based on cash flow of the property. They're paid quarterly. Two is they're paid on the profit at the sale of the property. They get their portion of the equity plus the principal paid out of the mortgage, okay, any profits. Three is they're given the principal or a portion of their principal back at a refinance, if we do refinance. Okay, my personal opinion on refinances is I never put that in my underwriting, and I never guarantee it to my investors. Okay, if we refinance and we benefit from it, everybody benefits from it. It only makes the returns better. If we don't refinance, it never makes the expected returns worse. Okay, does that make sense? So I don't underwrite a refinance in to make my deal juiced up looking better. And that happens quite a bit. I just saw a deal in one of my competitors in the market that I was offering, and I had no clue how he got that deal and makes it work for his investors, and that's why. Because he's putting a bridge loan on it, and he's underwriting that refinance in there. And what happens if that refinance doesn't happen? Well, his investment's terrible. So it's pretty risky because we don't know where our interest rates are going. We don't know where the market's going 100%. So in my opinion, that's risky.
Could you maybe walk me through number two? I mean, are you saying that paid based on the profit at sale of the property, so they get the portion of the equity? So they get a plus principal paid on. Are you giving?
So that's not including the principal, right? So their principal comes back. Potentially, it's already came back through the distributions. But
yeah.
Their principal comes back plus they get the portion of the equity. So if we buy a building at $1 million and we sell it for $2 million,
yeah,
we made $2 million of profit. We split that up between all the investors for their.
Bought it at $1 million and sold it for $2 million?
Yeah, buy it at $1 million, sell it at $2 million.
Okay.
With no closing cost or anything in an imaginary world,
okay,
right? We made a $1 million profit.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we give that $1 million profit to our investors.
Okay.
To the percentage
According
that they
to the
invest,
percentage that
of
they
course. Yeah.
And you're saying that you've already paid down the principal that they invested previously?
Well, and if we haven't, the principal comes back, of course, too.
Yeah.
Right.
But the general partners, do they get 30% of the sale also?
They're getting their percentage.
Yeah, so they would do 70% to you back the
Yep.
investors.
Yep.
So they get their percentage of the 70%.
Right. Right. You're selling shares, okay? In a syndication, you're selling shares, right? So if we've got $1 million investment, okay, and you're selling 1 million shares, if you did it at $1 per share, maybe you did it at $1,000 per per share, but you did $1 per share, you're selling 1 million shares. And so you're paid based on the amount of shares that you own. Confused? We got it? All right, so protecting your investors in a hot market, how do we do it? We're in a white hot market, in my opinion, in the Twin Cities. We finance right. That's where we don't put 80% loan to value on, right? We make sure we got good debt service coverage ratio. In my opinion, you want to be closer to that, like 1.4-ish, 1.5 if you can be, or even better. You have enough liquid capital. That's what we were talking about earlier. You over-raise. If we need 30% for a down payment, and let's call that $1 million, and then we're going to put another $1 million in the renovation, that's $2 million. We've got our closing costs. Closing costs might be another $300,000, so now we're at $2.3 million. That's not all I should raise. I want some reserves. I want a lot of reserves, especially if I'm doing a big renovation. Okay, so I want to put a good chunk of reserves. Again, that's dependent on the risk of the property, but on a property where I'm doing a decent renovation, I want to put at least 8 months worth of principal and interest into a reserve account. Okay, if I know I'm losing money at the front end, I'm also going to put that money away so I can pay my mortgage, because if I can't pay my mortgage, my investors are going to be very happy when the bank takes the property. Okay. And the last thing is make sure you have cash flow. Obviously very important. A lot of people out there don't really think about all their expenses and end up having no cash flow. When I was in California and I talked about this, everybody there laughed. They don't have cash flow. They buy for appreciation only.
Why?
So, yeah. Syndication musts. Use a securities attorney. Okay, use an attorney. We've got several good attorneys in the Twin Cities. I'll shout out to my attorney, Zach Robbins. Use a securities attorney. Okay. Invest your own money. Create a minimum investment. Okay, my typical deal is about $50,000. But here's the thing. Okay, you might go, well, it's a lot of money. I don't want to do $50,000. So I'm going to do 20, 10, whatever you think you're going to do. If I set my investment minimum at $50,000, I'll get a lot of investors that invest $50,000 or more. So if I set my investment at $30,000, I will get a lot of investors that will invest at $30,000. So let's say at the $30,000 level, I get 20 investors that invest $30,000. If I just raise that and set it to the same investors, if I raise that to 50, I'll probably get about 26 to 28 that'll invest $50,000 just because I raised my minimum. They'll come in at the minimum if they can. So if the minimum's 30, they'll come in at 30. If the minimum's 50, they'll come in at 50. So you see what I did? If I got, 30 investors at $30,000, how much is that? 900,000?
Yeah,
900,000. If I've got 28 investors at 50,000, somebody quick at math, what's that?
A lot more.
50, 1.5, 1.4, 1.4 million? 1.48?
1.47.
Yeah, way more, right?
I said.
Yeah. So a lot more, and that's truly what happens. So set your minimums with an expectation of how much you can raise. It's going to take you a lot longer to get to $2 million if your minimum's at $20,000. And you're just not, in my opinion, you're just not going to lose that much money. If somebody doesn't have, if somebody's scraping to get $20,000, do you really want them as your investor? Right? If it's that hard to get 50, do you want them investing? That's a decision you have to make yourself, not me.
Generally speaking, the smaller the investor, the louder they squeak.
And that's true too, yeah. Somebody that struggles to get that $50,000 in, anything goes wrong, any little hiccups happen, they're the ones that are squeaking.
Benjis.
What's that?
We call them Benjis, little dogs.
Yeah. Yeah, the little dogs always bite, right?
They bark.
They bark a lot.
They bark and bite.
Do you ever get, once you got that track record of like, we've successfully gave this much cash and cash return every deal we do, where people are investing more than the minimum? Or reinvesting, what they've earned in one project in another?
Yeah, I mean, my minimum's 50, doesn't mean that all the investors do 50. When I do 50, I've got investors that do 200, or some even more than that. Typically, like I just added up my average, the last deal was about $70,000 was the average investor. So typically we're above that 50. But we always get, if I've got 30 investors in a deal, I always will get the largest percentage at $50,000. And then the rest of them will be scattered anywhere from above 50 to all the way up. Communicate and under promise, over deliver. That's really important in my opinion, right? Especially right now. It's so easy to get excited about this hot market. Rents are going up by 6%, and we underwrite that they'll just continue to go up forever, and fairy dust will keep on going. I'd say try to under promise. It's hard because this market's hot, but under promise. I'm always trying to be conservative on my cap rate exit, my rent projections. I would rather go, we're only going to increase rent by 2%, we're going to increase expenses by 2% a year, rent by 2% a year, than assuming rent's going to go up 5-6% still.
How many bips over your entry do you go?
Yeah, good question. Depends is the answer. Depends on what's happened with the market, depends on the location of the property, and what's happening in that location as well. So typically I'm close to a full, if current market's at 5, I'm typically underwriting an exit at 6.
That's conservative.
But if the market hasn't changed that much, if that neighborhood's really gentrifying, it might be more like 5.5. If I'm buying in a higher risk area, and I think there's gentrification happening, but we're not quite sure where it's going to go, I might even be a little higher than that. Northeast Minneapolis. If I would have invested in Northeast Minneapolis 15, 18 years ago, you would have wanted to be a little more conservative. Today, probably no Northeast is going to continue to be good, right? A little different story. So,
how many how many investors do you typically have on your deals?
well, do the math. I mean, it depends on how much I'm going to raise, but if my average is 70 times whatever I'm going to raise.
What else do you do to minimize the squeaking when you're going through the
Communication.
506B or 506D? Like, do you make sure that you say, hey, just to confirm, this isn't your 401k, this isn't your IRA, this isn't your kid's college fund,
Yeah, I mean, communication and expectations, understanding who they are, what they're doing. Do you want to really work with them?
Why shouldn't they be the 401k?
Sometimes making a mistake and getting the wrong investor and then never allowing them back into your investments again.
Well, I just feel
it happens.
like
I think so, right?
people might be more emotionally attached to money if it was in their 401k, or if it was their kid's college fund and they took it out, or if I'm just trying to think of like.
Actually, we've seen people less attached to their 401ks because it's so far in the future for them to access.
Okay.
That we've seen much larger flows coming from those sorts of funds than from like liquid assets.
The only more carefree in the interim of an investment, or in the middle of an investment investor, other than a self-directed IRA investor, a retirement account investor, is an institutional investor, and they're investing at much larger chunks. But once they make the decision, anybody who is at that level makes a decision, they don't second guess themselves. And the higher you go with the dollar amounts invested, the more that attitude is pervasive, because they have the right attitude. That's why they are where they are and are able to invest where they invest.
Yeah. How sophisticated is the person, right? So do they have real estate experience? You know, have they invested in businesses? Do they own a business? Do they have a lot of free money, right? I mean, right? Do they not? Money's not
But it's
free.
just like
Do
sitting
they
there
have?
collecting.
Do they have money?
Like,
Yeah. Do they have money?
Right.
Or, you know, are they just scraping by and maybe saved up $50,000 and want to invest because they heard it on my podcast?
Right, but you also talked about being like a good steward of your investors' money, so I was just.
I think that's important to understand who they are.
Okay.
Honestly, I definitely understand who your investors are, and turn people down.
It's okay to do that?
100%.
Oh, yeah. I fire them.
I would rather
Fire them all the time, or
Really?
reject them all the time,
Yeah.
absolutely. And in property management, we managed, before we sold the private management company, we managed almost 9,000 units nationwide and 600,000 square feet of retail space. And we fired clients all the time. Life's too short. Sam talked about this at the beginning. You got, learn to have fun and enjoy what you do.
I fired 2 last week.
Oh, yeah. Actually,
Yeah,
you
you're gonna
had mentioned
Slow to
that.
hire and fast to fire.
You're gonna have, I mean, when I was doing flipping, I was taking a lot of private money, and there's several people I stopped doing business with. I mean, one of my bigger investors, I just didn't want to do business with him anymore because he was a pain in the butt. You know, I would get a loan from him, and all of a sudden he'd call me up 4 weeks later asking for the money, want some of the money back or all of the money back, and it's like, I don't want to deal with you anymore. You're done. So it's absolutely fine to not take people's money. You have to feel comfortable with that person. They have to feel comfortable with you, but you have to feel comfortable with them.
It's like a marriage, you know, you both gotta want
Maybe not quite that extreme.
Oh, yeah, it's not that challenging.
Would you be willing to share kind of your splits on the internal side of the GP, like you've got the different roles and what, is that too in the weeds for you?
Well, that's a little in the weeds because every deal's different, right? It depends on your partnerships and how you bring things in the deal. And yeah, it really depends on the roles of the people.
Okay.
You know, so I mean, some deals I've got pretty much 100% of the GP. Other deals, you know, I've got 50% or so of the GP. You know, so it really depends on the deal and who you're bringing in and what their roles are. So there's a common theme out there. So there's a common thing right now that's happening is there's people out there that what they do is they bring money into a deal, and that's fine if you do it right. Again, consult an attorney. What kind of I'm seeing in the industry, and again, when I'm saying this, consult an attorney, because honestly, you can get yourself into trouble if you do this wrong. So I caution saying this because people are going to get in trouble for this, and they have been. So in order to raise money for a deal, you either need to be part of a general partnership or you need to be a broker and be able to actually, you know, raise money legally, have the license to do it. So what people do right now is if, let's say we're doing a $5 million raise, that $5 million is worth a third, roughly, 30% of the general partnership. So if you bring in all 5, you get a 30% of the general partnership. If you bring in $1 million of the 5, you get a fifth of the 30% of the general partnership, which owns 30% of the deal. Split that up. Now, when I say be careful with this, is because you can't just bring money into a deal and get paid on that transaction unless, again, you're part of the general partnership or you have a license to do it. So you can't just be a money raiser. So they have to have different roles. You have to make sure you're doing it right. Again, consult an attorney. If you're going to try to bring money into a deal, consult an attorney. Okay? It's a great way to get involved in real estate, by the way. Great way to get involved in somebody else's deal. If you've got those connections and you can bring some money into a deal, it's a great way to get into a deal, but you just want to do it right. Okay? So that's my advice. Another trap, people are advertising, right? So 506B, I said you can't advertise for that, right? So you gotta be careful how you do it. I couldn't just come here and say, hey, I got this deal, I'm raising $3 million, talk about this deal, I'm raising $3 million, and then, well, first I couldn't just say, hey, anybody want to do it. But even after, if I've never met you other than right now, you couldn't come up to me and go, hey, I'd love to invest in that deal, and then actually invest in my deal if I haven't met you before. I talked about the deal, but I'm up here today, I'm talking, you guys all went around the room, you said what your goals are, so a lot of people, their goals are to do a syndication, right? Well, if I come up to you after the meeting and say, hey, you're gonna do a syndication, I'd love to be a part of your syndication when you get one, and we meet, we talk, and we get a relationship, perfectly fine, right? So you can talk about what you're doing, you can't advertise what you're doing. So recently a young guy, I think he was like 26 years old, raised $564,000, not a lot. Probably very bare minimum of what you should raise for a syndication, I don't even know if it's worth it. He got fined big time by the SEC because he put on Facebook that he was raising money for this deal, and some of the investors saw the Facebook ad and therefore invested, and he got a big fine. It's 506B offering.
Go through just the advertising of
That's right.
it. You could not even get the deal,
Right.
just putting that Facebook ad up without
There's a big kind of, I think, misunderstanding in the market right now by people that aren't experienced, that because crowdfunding is now possible, that we can now advertise, right? Minvest came through, it's possible. I can take non-accredited and accredited investors, right? I just gotta meet them or whatever. That's possible. Or they gotta be, if they're family, it's fine. Or I hear, that's the other thing, joint ventures. A lot of people are doing joint ventures wrong too. They're, I'm talking to you and you go, hey, I got $1 million, I'd love to put it in your deal, and we don't set up a securities, we don't set up a syndication, we just do a joint venture, and you do nothing. You just sit on the sidelines and do nothing. Technically, I just sold you securities, right, and we should do the correct model. But we're seeing that a lot. People go, well, but we're related. So, congratulations, you're related, but it doesn't matter.
So does that mean if you do like an Invest for a portion of what you're trying to raise, like you can't put that on like LinkedIn as, hey, we already did this, it's closed?
If you're doing a Minvest, it's different.
Okay.
Yeah, he's talking about, these are all technically exemptions or registrations. 506B, 506C, these are exemptions.
They are.
Right? Minvest, Score, Reg CF, those are also exemptions. But they just have different rules around, mainly solicitations, is the main thing to keep in mind.
So,
solicitation is the advertising